Have you ever watched someone hurt you, then walk away smiling like nothing ever happened? Have you ever sat in silence still bleeding while they flaunted their healing journey on social media? And have you ever wondered, does karma really work? Or do some people just get away with everything? If any of those questions hit close to home, this video is for you. Because while you were breaking quietly, karma was already moving, just not in the way you'd expect. Not with drama, not with noise, but with subtle precision. While you were healing in silence, life was settling the score in ways you couldn't see, yet they couldn't escape. The truth is, life doesn't always pay its debts in front of an audience. It does so quietly in restless nights, in fading friendships, in empty victories, disguised as Instagram posts. This is not a video about revenge. It's about truth. And more than that, it's about the quiet power you reclaim when you stop chasing closure and start choosing peace. You see, there's a certain kind of strength that's born in the absence of reaction, when you no longer explain yourself, when you stop reaching out, when your silence becomes your boundary and you're healing your revolution. While they were out there performing happiness, curating captions, collecting likes, you were rebuilding something far more valuable: inner peace. In this video, we'll walk through 5 subtle silent signs that karma is already at work in their life, not through chaos, but through erosion, not through punishment, but through reflection. These signs aren't always visible at first glance, but once you see them, you'll never unsee them. We'll also explore how timeless Stoic philosophy helps you rise above betrayal, lies, and manipulation without becoming bitter and without losing who you are. Whether you've been ghosted, gaslit, or discarded, this guide isn't just about surviving the pain, it's about reclaiming your strength without needing revenge. Because true peace, it's built in quiet moments. And karma, it never misses, it just waits for the noise to fade. So if you've ever felt shattered but refused to shatter someone else, if you've ever stayed soft in a world that tried to harden you, if you've ever wanted justice but chose to heal instead, then take a breath. You're exactly where you need to be. Let's begin. 1. The gradual loss of what they once took for granted. It didn't happen all at once. There was no explosion, no dramatic downfall, no public reckoning. That's not how karma works. It doesn't strike like lightning. It erodes slowly, silently, thoroughly. When they walked away, they did it like it was nothing. No explanation, no remorse, no hesitation. They moved on fast, or at least it looked that way. New people, new posts, a shiny new version of themselves. And you stood still. Not because you were weak, but because you were learning something they hadn't: how to let silence speak. You didn't send a message. You didn't fight for closure. You didn't perform your pain for the world to see. You simply disappeared from their story, and that's where everything started to change. Because while they were out there chasing noise, karma was already subtracting quietly. At first, nothing seemed off. They were still smiling in pictures, still surrounded by people. But beneath the surface, things began to fade. A text left unread, a call that goes unreturned, a job opportunity they were counting on slipped through at the very last moment. That new connection that seemed so promising, now tinged with tension they can't quite explain. And the worst part, it all feels like coincidence from the outside, but deep down they feel it. Not as a punishment, but as a haunting. Because karma doesn't scream, it whispers, it dissolves. It unravels everything they once clung to bit by bit until what they called a fresh start begins to feel like a string of unfinished endings. And here's the irony: the silence they once used as a weapon against you, now it surrounds them. Back then you feared it. Now it's the space where you found peace. But for them, that silence doesn't heal, it echoes. They still post the highlight reels, the perfect smiles, the inspirational captions about growth. But look closer. Look at their eyes. There's no sadness, no guilt, just absence. It's like they're not even living inside their own skin anymore. Because the truth is, they didn't just lose you. They lost the version of themselves that only existed when you were in their life. The version you believed in even when they failed. The one you forgave even when they never said sorry. The one who was loved not for what they performed, but for who they truly were. But that version died the day they discarded the connection that nurtured it. And maybe, just maybe, they felt a sudden urge to reach out, to check in, to see if you still remembered. But they didn't, and you didn't either. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally understood that your silence holds more truth than any message ever could. You weren't too much. You were just consistent. You weren't overreacting. You were the only one responding with heart. They laughed at your boundaries. They mocked your softness. Now they long for someone who gets them without needing to explain. But no one stays. Not really, because what you gave them isn't common. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. But it was rare. And now that it's gone, life doesn't punish them. It simply removes what no longer aligns with truth. They're not falling. They're drifting. The support that once came easily now feels transactional. The invitations come slower. The smiles feel thinner. The love conditional. That's karma, not cruel, just exact. And one day the silence you gave them will hit harder than all the noise they used to drown it out. Because karma finishes what dignity starts. You didn't seek retribution. You didn't play games. You observed. Not because you were passive, but because you trusted something stronger than ego time. Time exposes. Time humbles. Time rebalances. Marcus Aurelius said, "If someone can prove me wrong, I'll gladly change. For it is the truth I seek, and the truth never harmed anyone. But those who refuse to reflect, they're left living in the very consequences they deny." Back then, when they stood in front of you with cold eyes and sharp words they thought you'd break, instead you bent towards solitude, and there in the quiet you grew roots. While they keep losing what once came effortlessly, you've gained something they never valued: emotional grounding. You don't have to tell the world you're doing better. You simply are. And though bitterness may still tap on your shoulder from time to time, tempting you to wonder if they'll ever see what they lost, you already know the answer. It doesn't matter, because what they lost is no longer your burden. What you build now, that's your responsibility. So you build, quietly, deliberately, brick by brick. You choose peace over closure, purpose over attention, clarity over validation. And over time, the life you rebuild no longer needs their apology to make sense. So next time the urge to reach out creeps in, pause. Ask yourself, do I want them to know, or do I need to remind myself, then answer with silence? Because that's the most honest conversation you'll ever have. And it leads us to the next truth, that not all joy is real. Not all smiles are whole, and not every moving on means healing has taken place. Let's talk about what comes next when happiness becomes a mask and karma shows up in the form of exhaustion. 2. Overcompensating with fake happiness. There's a moment after betrayal, a strange quiet one, when you step back and let go, and they step forward into the spotlight they turned on themselves. At first glance, it might look like they're doing fine. Actually, more than fine. They're glowing, they're out, they're laughing, traveling, posting, a lot. You open your phone and there they are, smiling in places you never visited together. Captions about peace, healing, new beginnings. Quotes about growth, self-love, and spiritual breakthroughs. It's loud, it's curated, it's perfectly framed. But something about it doesn't feel right. The smiles don't quite reach the eyes. The energy behind every post feels strained. And deep down, something inside you starts whispering, this isn't healing. This is panic wearing a mask. Because here's what no one tells you. People don't post about peace when they have it. They post when they're trying to convince themselves they've found it. Real healing doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need filters. It lives in your tone, in your stillness, in your ability to walk away from noise without leaving a trail of quotes behind. You know that now. But back then, you didn't. Back then, you saw those pictures and wondered, have they really moved on? Are they truly happier now that I'm gone? It hurt, not because you wanted them to suffer, but because you thought your love was worth missing. And when it looked like they weren't missing a thing, it felt like your heart had lied to you. But clarity, oh, clarity changes everything. You stopped reacting. You stopped replaying conversations in your head. You stopped looking for answers in the shape of their new life. And the moment you did that, the performance started cracking. Now, when you look at their photos, you don't see joy. You see exhaustion. You see someone running on empty, pretending they're full. You remember those early days after everything collapsed. You sat in silence, face to face with pain. They sprinted into distractions, new hobbies, new people, new wardrobes, maybe even a new version of themselves photoshopped for likes. And back then, you envied them. But now you understand that performance is heavy. It requires constant energy to maintain. And sooner or later, something breaks. The truth starts slipping through in micro moments. The nervous laugh that doesn't quite land. The shift in tone mid-sentence. The inconsistency between what they post and how they speak. They told you once that you were too emotional. Now they cry quietly in rooms that feel too big. They told you that you were holding them back. Now they chase moments that never stay. They're not free. They're fragmented. And every post is another stitch in a story they can't quite keep together. They said they needed space to grow, but what they really needed was someone to believe in them while they figured out how. That someone was you. And they gave it up before they understood its value. But you kept growing anyway. You stopped announcing your evolution. You stopped explaining your healing. You stopped needing the world to validate your journey. Because you realized that peace doesn't shout, it whispers. And joy, real joy, doesn't post selfies. It sits quietly with you in the morning when you sip your coffee in sunlight and realize you're no longer carrying the weight of proving your worth. You don't need to prove you've moved on. You just have. Meanwhile, they're still trying to convince strangers of a happiness they don't feel. They wrap quotes in poetic captions, hoping anyone will believe them. But you know better now. Epictetus said, it's not events that disturb us, but our judgment about them. And your judgment has changed. It's not their photos that hurt anymore. It's the memory of who you used to be when you believed them. That person, you've outgrown them. And that growth doesn't need proof. You don't need to clap back. You don't need to send your own pictures with captions about rising. You don't need to perform your piece. You just need to live it. So next time their feed pops up another sunset, another caption about letting go, smile gently. Not with pride, not with bitterness, but with the kind of calm that says, I see you. But I'm not part of that story anymore. Let them perform. Let them pretend. Let them call it healing while they recycle old wounds in new costumes. You've chosen something different. You've chosen truth, stillness, presence. And that presence, that's your glow. It doesn't need lighting. It doesn't need likes. It just is. Because the most radical kind of healing, it's the refusal to be dragged back into a dynamic that thrives on reaction. And sometimes karma doesn't show up in a dramatic fall. Sometimes it shows up in exhaustion when pretending peace becomes too heavy to carry. Eventually the mask slips. Eventually the noise quiets. Eventually they're left alone with what's real. And by then, you'll be long gone too far along your own path to even notice. Because you're not here to witness their fall. You're here to rise. And as you rise, the echoes of the past start fading. But there's one more place where karma often hides one that's quieter, more subtle, but unmistakable. When they speak in riddles, send cryptic messages, and can't stop circling back to the version of you they lost without ever saying your name. Let's explore that next. 3. Indirect communication and obsession. They won't say your name, not out loud, not in a direct message, not in a heartfelt apology that ever actually arrives. But somehow, every word still leads back to you. You see it in the captions. Vague quotes about loyalty, cryptic lines about betrayal and protecting their energy, memes about outgrowing people who never deserved their time, a lyric here, a one-sentence post there, dripping in meaning, but void of accountability. To the world it looks deep. To you it looks familiar. Too familiar, because you know their language. You once loved them deeply, deep enough to understand even the unspoken parts. And now everything they say bleeds with the same unspoken truth. They're still talking to you. Not because they love you, but because they're still fighting the version of you that no longer exists. They don't want you back. They want to win against the mirror you left behind. That's what guilt does. It doesn't disappear. It disguises itself in healing posts and performative wisdom. It wraps itself in poetry and filtered introspection, hoping someone will offer sympathy for the wounds they caused. But you don't flinch anymore. Not when you see their name. Not when their post shows up in your feed. Not even when mutual friends hint that they're still thinking about you. because you've already escaped the orbit. You're not circling that storyline anymore. You're not looking for secret messages in their paragraphs. You're not waiting for a confession that never comes. You know what they're doing, maybe better than they do. They're not talking to you. They're talking to the reflection of themselves they can't face. Every passive-aggressive lesson learned, post A, whispered hope that someone will tell them they were the victim. Every late-night lyric about heartbreak, a ghost call to the silence you left behind. And that's the thing. You didn't just leave the relationship. You left a mirror, and now they're staring into it, hoping it blinks first. Sometimes it comes out in subtle ways. A random, like on an old story. A message that lands at 1:43 a.m. with no context and way too much emotion. A sudden surge of activity on your profile, like they're checking to see if you've moved on. But you don't respond. Not because you want to punish them, but because you've outgrown the need to be understood by someone who chose confusion. They're stuck in commentary. You're walking in silence. They still write posts to get your attention. You no longer care to read between the lines. Stoicism teaches us this. To respond to what no longer serves us is to anchor ourselves in what never healed us. So you let them speak around you, about you, toward you. Even if your name is never spoken, your energy is still felt. Because you were real, and real doesn't go quietly, but you're not seeking revenge. You're not clapping back. You're not sending long texts to correct the narrative. You don't need to. You are the narrative they can't rewrite. Let them chase likes. Let them craft riddles. Let them share quotes dressed as wisdom, hoping strangers will affirm a version of events they can't face head on. You've moved on not just in location, but in frequency, and they can't reach you here. Their obsession doesn't look dramatic. It's not flowers at your door or pleading voicemails. It's quieter than that, more persistent. It's in the way they try to relive your presence through someone else. It's in the way they talk about boundaries now, even though they once laughed at yours. It's in the hollow way they say they're healing while posting daily proof that they haven't. But you're not judging, you're just removed. Because you know what real peace feels like. It doesn't need to be announced. As Marcus Aurelius said, if someone speaks ill of you, continue to live so that no one will believe them. That's exactly what you're doing. You don't argue, you evolve. In evolution, it's silent, it's steady, and it's undeniable. So the next time another caption floats by, or another cryptic lyric feels just a little too familiar, breathe. Don't engage. Don't decode. Don't let it pull you back. They're not trying to reconnect. They're trying to release guilt without taking responsibility. That's not your work anymore. If anything still lingers inside you, something you wish you could say, write it down. Not to send, but to release. Tear it up. Burn it. Let it go like the last words of a story you've already outgrown. Because healing doesn't happen in confrontation. It happens in restraint. Let them talk. Let them pretend it's not about you. You don't need to live in their life anymore. You already live in their mind. And that is karma. But what happens when karma stops being a ghost and starts becoming a reflection? When they meet someone who treats them the same way they treated you, that's when the real mirror appears. Let's turn to that next. 4. The loss of trust in others and in themselves. I just don't trust people anymore. They say it like it's wisdom, calm, controlled, as if they've evolved into some emotionally disciplined version of themselves who now sets strong, mature boundaries. But you can hear it, can't you? There's something off in the tone. It's not self-respect. It's not healing. It's hurt dressed up in logic. Because the truth is, they don't trust anyone anymore, not because the world is broken, but because they broke something sacred, and the person they trust the least themselves. You remember what they used to be like. Open, free, laughing without caution. They'd lean in without fear, connect quickly, speak without filters. But that was before all the doors they slammed in your face, before all the warmth they turned into silence, before they took your softness and called it weakness. Now they flinch before connection. They scan every conversation for hidden motives. They hesitate before kindness, unsure if it's real or just bait. They'll tell others they've learned discernment. They'll say, I don't let people in easily anymore, as if that's growth. But what they don't say, the part they never admit, is that their own guilt now shapes the lens through which they see everyone else. They used to mock you for reading too much into things. Now they overanalyze every message they receive. They used to tell you to relax when you asked for reassurance. Now they lie awake at night questioning everything unsaid. You see the shift. Even without speaking to them, you feel it in the way they move differently now. Their presence once felt grounded, even playful. Now it's guarded, careful, exhausted. But they don't call it fear. They call it boundaries. Except, boundaries built from pain, not clarity, are just walls. And pain makes a terrible architect. They told themselves you were too much, too emotional, too invested. Now they cry alone and pretend not to care. They once believed love made them weak. Now they can't feel safe in anyone's love at all. Seneca once wrote, "He who does wrong rarely trusts anyone else, for he knows what he is capable of." And that's what they live with now. Not some grand punishment from the universe, but a quiet gnawing erosion, an inner knowing that they violated something meaningful. Not just in you, but in themselves. That fracture, it doesn't heal by staying busy. It doesn't disappear in new relationships or in long solo walks or in Instagram quotes about boundaries and self-worth. It lingers, especially in the quiet moments. And when they finally meet someone who reminds them of you, not your face but your energy, they stall, they sabotage, they run. Because vulnerability now reminds them of what they once destroyed without understanding real love, steady love, the kind that stays even when things get messy. They hesitate not because you were too much, but because now they know they'll never find that version of loyalty again. You don't need to respond when they reach out someday, because if they do, it won't be to reconnect. It'll be because they miss who they were when they were with you. That version, it only existed inside your presence. And when they lost you, they lost access to a gentler self, one that still believed in truth, trust, and tenderness. But you've moved on without bitterness, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. You understood something they still haven't. You weren't supposed to rehabilitate someone who won't be honest about their own damage. So you let go, not with hate, with clarity. You stopped explaining yourself, stopped proving your worth, stopped hoping they'd finally see what they shattered. And in that release, you became someone new, someone calm, grounded, aligned. You live with intention now. You protect your peace not by building walls, but by knowing who deserves access. And they now stand outside the life they once belonged to, looking in through a window that will never open again. You didn't slam it shut. You simply stopped answering to a past that no longer deserves your voice. And if ever you start to feel that old temptation to explain, to reach back, to forgive one more time, write this down just for you. I don't need anyone to believe I was right. I just need to keep doing what's right. Let that be your compass. Because trust isn't just something you give to others. It's something you rebuild in yourself. And when you stop trying to be the exception in someone else's broken pattern, you become the rule in your own healing. So let them wonder. Let them sit with the silence they once gave you. Let them live in a world where every kindness feels suspicious. That's not cruelty. That's consequence. And what happens next? Well, sometimes karma doesn't just knock quietly. Sometimes it walks in wearing a smile and hands them someone who treats them exactly the way they treated you. Let's talk about that. 5. Meeting their mirror. It felt magnetic, almost instant. They met someone new, and just like that, they were all in. They called it real, rare, different this time. But life has a way of reflecting us back to ourselves. Not always with fireworks, sometimes with echoes. At first, everything seemed perfect. The laughter, the spark, the chemistry. It looked like everything they ever claimed they didn't need, and suddenly they were craving it. But what they couldn't see, what they didn't expect, was that this wasn't just a new person. It was a mirror. And not the kind that flatters, the kind that reveals. Because soon the patterns began to show. Hot and cold. Affection one day, distance the next. Moments of connection that vanished without explanation. Sound familiar? It should. Because what they're experiencing now is exactly what they once handed to you. You used to ask for clarity and they called you clingy. Now they reread texts at 2 a.m. trying to decode silence. You once stayed up questioning why the air between you felt so heavy while they slept soundly. Now they lie awake wondering where the warmth went. The emotional distance they used like a weapon, now it's aimed at them, and for the first time they feel what it's like to give without being met, to love without certainty, to crave connection and get just enough to stay, but never enough to feel secure. This isn't just karma, it's education. It's the universe teaching gently but unmistakably what it means to stand on the other side of a pattern they once created. They thought they were in control, but now they chase. They overextend. They compromise their own boundaries trying to hold on to someone who vanishes the moment things get real. Back then you cried. Now they understand why. But they'll never say it. Most don't. To admit it would be to confront the truth that they are now with someone who treats them the way they treated you. And the realization doesn't come with thunder. It creeps in, slowly, softly, through silence, through confusion, through that aching feeling that something is missing, but they can't name it. What's missing is what they once had. You, the presence that showed up without needing applause, the patience that stayed even when things got messy, the love that didn't require performance. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." And you've lived that. You didn't mirror their coldness. You didn't make them chase or beg or explain. You just walked away with grace, with dignity, with silence. And now they feel it not through collapse, but through contrast. This new person they're with, they don't explain. They don't reassure. They don't stay when things get heavy. Suddenly, your old annoying questions sound like emotional maturity. Your neediness looks like loyalty. Your intensity feels like home. But it's too late. Because while they tried to forget you, life reminded them. Not with flashbacks, with experience. You didn't need to prove their choices were wrong. They're living those choices now. And the person they once treated like a burden, you became the benchmark, the calm they miss, the security they can't recreate. But you're gone, not out of spite, out of growth. They try to fix things now, just like you once did. They chase, they question, they cry into their pillow while pretending they're fine, and they'll keep trying to rewrite the outcome, keep posting about lessons learned, but deep down they're not learning something new. They're finally feeling what they once refused to face. You don't have to watch it unfold. You don't have to see it break, because this isn't about revenge, it's about evolution. You didn't rise to make a point. You rose because staying small for their comfort was never your purpose. You don't need to explain. You don't need to circle back. You don't need to re-enter the story to prove how it ends. Because for you, it already ended with peace. And for them, they're still spinning inside the lesson. You've moved on to a higher frequency, a place where your silence speaks volumes, where your presence is no longer something they can take for granted, where your worth doesn't need to be seen because you see it yourself. So when the bitterness rises because yes, it still can, take a deep breath and remind yourself gently they are no longer yours and you are no longer who you were. That's not a line of vengeance, that's a doorway, and now it's time to walk through it. Let's close this chapter and seal it with something even karma respects: a life that no longer needs revenge, only peace. 6. While karma works on them, you build a life that needs no revenge. You didn't wait for an apology. You didn't beg for understanding. You didn't sit by the phone hoping one day they'd suddenly realize who you were, what you gave, and how deeply they had misjudged your love. You walked away not out of anger, but out of something far more powerful: self-respect. Because you finally realized you don't need to prove anything to people who couldn't see your worth when it was offered freely. You don't need them to admit what they did. You don't need them to say, "I'm sorry." You just need to keep going. And while karma quietly does its work on them shifting, dissolving, revealing, you've been doing something else entirely. You've been rebuilding, brick by brick, day by day, not for show, not to make them jealous, but to honor the person you were always meant to become. You've been choosing peace over pettiness, solitude over chaos, purpose over performance. And the truth is, they may still try to return, not with a grand apology, but with a casual message. A like on your photo, a question disguised as curiosity. But it's not because they've changed. It's because they miss who they were when they were loved by you. Because around you they felt safe. They felt seen. They were forgiven without asking, held without earning, understood without performing. But that version of you, the one who tolerated, explained, begged to be heard, that version no longer exists. You buried it in the silence they left you with. And in its place stands someone stronger, not colder, just clearer. Now your silence isn't empty. It's sacred. It holds boundaries. It holds dignity. It holds all the parts of you they didn't value, now protected behind a life they no longer have access to. Because healing doesn't mean going back. Healing means rising without needing to be seen rising. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who did the injury." And that's what you've done. You didn't retaliate. You didn't play games. You chose growth. You chose stillness. And now you live in a place they can't reach, not because you block them, but because they don't belong there anymore. Your life now moves to a different rhythm, one of emotional clarity, one of intentional presence, one of grounded joy that doesn't need validation or permission to exist. You stopped checking their stories, stopped wondering if they regret it, stopped measuring your worth by their recognition, because somewhere along the way, your healing stopped being about them, and it became about you. It became about waking up and no longer feeling the need to defend your love, about drinking your coffee in peace, no longer scanning your mind for old conversations you wish had gone differently, about looking in the mirror and not seeing someone broken, but someone becoming. And the beauty of it all, you don't talk about them anymore. Not because you're suppressing, but because they no longer live inside your nervous system. The tension is gone. The looping thoughts quiet. The need to be understood replaced by the joy of understanding yourself. And if they ever wonder what happened to you, let them wonder. Let them scroll through old photos trying to figure out how someone they took for granted became someone so far beyond their reach. You owe them no answer, because your presence now says it all. This is stoicism in motion, not silence out of fear, but out of strength, not absence out of spite, but out of evolution. You became untouchable, not because you built walls, but because you built a foundation. And while they still spin in cycles, waiting for someone to forgive them, without accountability, you rise. Not loudly, not for attention, just with calm determination. So keep walking, keep choosing stillness, keep protecting your energy, because that is what karma respects, and that is what they will never unsee. Let your peace be the loudest thing you ever say, not as a weapon, but as a declaration. You never needed revenge, you just needed to heal, and now you're already there. Final chapter. Let your peace speak. Karma doesn't shout. It doesn't storm and breaking down doors demanding justice under spotlights. It doesn't come with noise or spectacle or fireworks that declare they got what they deserved. No, karma whispers. It moves in the quiet, in the silence between their sentences, in the echo of empty rooms they once filled with certainty, in the stillness they now find unbearable because your voice is no longer in it. You didn't get closure, you didn't get the apology, you didn't get the moment you replayed in your head where they finally said I was wrong. But what you did get was far more powerful. You got your power back. You chose not to scream, not to fight, not to perform. You chose silence. And in that silence, you rebuilt yourself, quietly, consistently, day by day. You stopped chasing answers. You stopped asking why. You stopped explaining your value to people who were never ready to receive it. And in doing so, you became untouchable. Because what they don't realize, what many people never realize, is that the most dangerous person is the one who no longer needs to be heard to be healed. You didn't shut down, you woke up. You began choosing truth over attention, peace over pettiness, growth over validation. And it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Because real transformation doesn't announce itself. It simply shows up one morning in the way you no longer flinch at their name, in the way you no longer hope they'll text, in the way your breath slows when you finally realize you survived And not just survived, you rose. They may still circle your orbit indirectly, through vague posts, through random messages, through whispers masked as wisdom, but none of that touches you now, because you're not standing in the same place you once were. You're no longer building bridges for people who burn them with wet hands. You stopped playing savior, stopped being the exception in someone else's broken story. Instead, you wrote a new story your own, one not built on revenge but resilience, one not driven by proving your worth but by living it, one that no longer bends to fit inside someone else's lack of awareness. You chose healing, and that choice didn't make you weak. It made you so strong that they no longer know how to stand in front of you. That's what karma really looks like. It's not collapse, it's contrast. While they keep spinning in stories trying to recapture the version of themselves that only existed in your presence, you're waking up with clarity. You're walking with intention. You're creating a life that doesn't need them to validate your growth, because your growth speaks for itself. And if they wonder why you're so quiet now, why you don't respond, why you no longer play the old roles they assigned you, let them wonder. You owe no answers to the people who once ignored your questions, no closure to the ones who weaponized your need for understanding. Because your silence now, it's not empty. It's full of boundaries, of lessons learned, of self-respect forged in fire. That silence, it's your message, your final word. It says, I'm not angry, I'm just not available for what doesn't serve me anymore. And that is what they feel every time they scroll through a memory they thought would fade. You see, the greatest revenge isn't destruction, it's reconstruction. It's showing up whole, it's showing up soft but strong, clear but kind, present but protected. It's the life you've built in the ashes of the one they took for granted. They don't see the sleepless nights, the deep breaths, the journal pages full of pain, the quiet mornings where you chose not to reach back even when your heart was screaming. But all of that, that's where your power was born. You became someone they can't touch, not because you block them, but because you no longer exist on the level where their energy lives. You've shifted from reaction to restraint, from noise to clarity, from surviving to sovereignty. So no, you didn't win by getting even. You won by no longer needing to. That's stoicism. That's mastery. That's what Marcus Aurelius meant when he said the best revenge is to be unlike him who did the injury. You stopped living through reaction, you started living through intention, and now every step you take in peace, every time you choose stillness over engagement, every time you don't text back, don't defend, don't justify, you are sending the loudest message you've ever sent. Without saying a word, your healing is the headline, your growth is the closure, your peace is the proof. So if there's ever a moment when bitterness rises, when memories sting, when silence feels heavy, remember this. You don't have to respond. You don't have to reach back. You don't have to explain who you are to people committed to misunderstanding you. Just keep living. Let your life say what your mouth doesn't. Let your presence say what their ears refuse to hear. Let your peace become the one thing they cannot escape. Because in the end, the most powerful thing you will ever say is nothing at all. If this message resonates with you, leave a quiet "I'm healing" in the comments. Not for the world to see, but for you to know. And if you're walking this path too of silent strength and stoic recovery, subscribe for more reminders that peace is your greatest legacy.